something, to actively do something. A negative moral obligation is a prohibition from doing something. A negative moral obligation is always easier to fulfill than a positive one. Simply by not doing whatever is prohibited, morally prohibited, you are fulfilling that obligation to perfection. Do not steal, do not lie, do not kill. Just by not doing those things, you're being perfectly moral on that count. A positive moral obligation, however, requires some calculation on your part. We have the positive moral obligation to help those in need, for example. But with how much? Should you give them 10% of what you have? Should you give 30% of what you have to carry this? 50%? How much? Well, that's a very subjective thing. And different people will come up with different answers depending on their personal circumstances, their upbringing, their degree of virtuousness, how virtuous they are. So a positive moral obligation is much harder to fulfill. There are some examples in which we can clearly see that positive moral obligations can also be easy to fulfill, and we are not excused from fulfilling them. If you are an Olympic swimmer and someone is swimming in the little swimming pool in a hotel and you're on your way to a party, say you're Michael Phelps and they're giving you this reception and you have your new suit with your new tie and this person is crying for help in the middle of this little swimming pool, well, should you save the person? You're going to ruin your suit. You may even lose your reception. Well, of course, the answer is yes. Okay. In that particular case, it's clear you should. But if you are, say, by a lake, you're not a great swimmer, and then someone is drowning, is crying for help really far inside the lake or the ocean, and you're not sure you're going to make it there, you're not sure you're going to be able to help the person out of the water, well, you may think twice before you make the decision to go and try to save the person, because you might not be able to make it. You might drown with the person. So in that case, now if you go past your positive, what is reasonable in fulfilling your positive moral obligation, if you pass what is reasonable, then we'll call you a hero. You're a hero. So remember, negative moral obligations, easy to fulfill, just don't do it. Don't do whatever is prohibited, morally prohibited. Positive moral obligations require a calculation. Not everyone will fulfill those positive moral obligations in the same way and to the same degree. But if you go beyond what is morally, what is reasonable in fulfilling those positive moral obligations, you are a hero. Let me say a few words now about the different ethical theories, in very broad terms. Okay, this is not a class on ethical theory. But basically, we have three types of ethical theories, meaning three kinds of justification for morality. One would be, and it's not written in the board, but I'm going to write it now, divine command theory. Divine command theory. And the reason why I didn't write it on the board before is because, in a sense, we've covered that with natural law. From a religious viewpoint, natural law is part of God's eternal law. Remember, we discussed that in the first part of the class. And so divine command theory is there in natural law, although divine command theory is sometimes used to refer more specifically to the moral law in a religious book, in the Bible, the Ten Commandments, or in the Quran, or in the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures. Okay, so that may be the source of morality. Your innate feeling for what is right and what is wrong, natural law, or the more explicit command that you find in religious texts. Besides that religious source of morality, we have two philosophical theories on which morality is grounded. One of them we call it consequentialism. That's the theory that says we need to look at consequences, results. If the result of our action is good, then whatever we do will be morally justified, morally good. One theory within consequentialism, which is an important one, a prominent one, is utilitarianism. And one of the philosophers associated to utilitarianism is John Stuart Mill, okay, this 18th century philosopher of the British Enlightenment, John Stuart Mill. Utilitarianism says there are different formulations, but the common formulation, the most common definition is that we should do what's best for most people. Of course, with that formulation, you can justify slavery, for example, because if we enslave a small minority of a population, the majority will be benefited. Okay? And we don't want that. We think that's immoral. Okay? And then we have deontology. Deontology, the word means duty, means the study of duty. Deontos means duty, deontology. And that means we should do what in itself is right and avoid the wrong, regardless of the consequences. If we do the right thing, the consequences are bad, we don't have to worry about the consequences, we've done the right thing. That theory is associated with Immanuel Kant, the 18th century philosopher, German philosopher of the Enlightenment. Of course, there is much more one could say about utilitarianism and its different formulations and deontological theory or theories. Okay? Let me just point out that with Kant's theory, one misses somewhat the distinction between the formal and the material that we discussed in the first part of the class today. One has to do whatever one has to do in a formal sense. It's unclear whether Kant makes the distinction between the formal or the objective and the subjective. Okay. And now, moral agency is the last of the concepts I'd like to discuss. The word agency comes from Latin agere, to do. So a moral agent is someone who does something. That's a moral agent, someone who does something. Moral agency refers to those individuals with the capacity to act morally, meaning to initiate moral action, to start moral action. Those who can tell right from wrong. You'll see how relevant this is when we get to discuss later topics in the semester, such as animal rights. Okay? So those are moral agents, and moral agency is the capacity for moral action. Okay, and now we're going to discuss the readings that are due for that were due for the first week, actually. So in this second part of this first block, we can call it second lecture, or second part of the same lecture. We're going to discuss now the readings that were due for this week by Henry David Thoreau. Resistance to civil government. Now, in this, we see in this book, which is extremely well known, read often by many people, we see the radical conflict that Thoreau sees between morality and the law. When you read it, you may get the feeling that he's a radical, and then you're definitely right at that. But you may also get the feeling that he's an anarchist. He's not. Okay? And we're going to see how he expresses himself. He starts by saying, "I heartily accept the motto, that government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted up to more often and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which I